The worst dates are not the ones that end badly. They are the ones that never seem to end at all. I realized that exactly 43 minutes into dinner with Ethan Walker. He was sitting across from me at a trendy Manhattan restaurant, enthusiastically explaining cryptocurrency for what felt like the 7th time, while I stared at my glass of sparkling water and wondered if pretending to receive an emergency phone call would be considered rude. The restaurant itself was beautiful. Warm lighting glowed against exposed brick walls. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Waiters moved gracefully between tables carrying expensive entrees that looked more like artwork than food. Everything about the evening should have felt romantic. Instead, I felt trapped. And then the market corrected itself. Ethan continued, completely unaware that I had not heard a single word in the last 3 minutes. I nodded politely. Wow. Exactly. He smiled proudly. Most people do not understand the complexity. I almost laughed. Not because the conversation was funny, because it was painfully predictable. This date had not been my idea. My best friend insisted I needed to start putting myself out there again, after spending nearly a year focused entirely on work. Apparently, according to her, the solution to burnout was listening to strangers explain their investment strategies over overpriced salmon. I glanced toward the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass outside. The city shimmered beneath the reflections of headlights and neon signs. Somewhere out there, people were having exciting evenings. I envied them. So what do you think? Ethan asked suddenly. I blinked. About what? His smile faltered. The business model. Wonderful. I had been caught. Honestly, I said. I think I need another drink before I can properly evaluate it. He laughed. I laughed too. Mine was less genuine. The waiter appeared and refilled our glasses. As he stepped away, something shifted in the atmosphere of the room. First, I could not explain it. Conversations seemed quieter. A few heads turned toward the entrance. Even some of the staff appeared more alert. It lasted only a moment, before normal activity resumed. Strange. Anyway, Ethan said, returning immediately to his favorite subject, if you diversify properly. I stopped listening again. My attention drifted across the restaurant. Near the back sat a private section separated by dark wood panels and subtle security. Most guests ignored it, yet something about that corner felt different. Important. Powerful. I could not explain why. Then I noticed him. A man seated alone at a table near the private area. Dark suit. Broad shoulders. Perfect posture. Even from a distance, he carried the kind of presence that changed the energy of a room without effort. He was not speaking. He was not drawing attention to himself. Yet somehow he stood out more than anyone else. Our eyes met for less than a second. Then I immediately looked away. My pulse stumbled unexpectedly. Ridiculous. I did not even know him. Sophie. Ethan's voice pulled me back. You seem distracted tonight. Before I could answer, I felt something strange. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. And when I glanced toward the private section again, the man in the dark suit was still looking directly at me. The man in the dark suit remained in my peripheral vision, his posture still and composed, yet the subtle intensity in his eyes suggested he had been watching me for longer than I realized. A careful observer hidden in plain sight, the kind of presence that made the air in the room feel charged without a word spoken. My attention flicked back to Ethan, whose enthusiasm for his own conversation had not waned, but I could not focus on his words, my curiosity anchored to the stranger. Then, as if sensing my awareness, he moved subtly, sliding a chair closer to the table I occupied without breaking the room's flow, the motion deliberate yet casual, drawing a silent line that marked attention, influence, and quiet authority. Ethan, oblivious, continued his monologue about market trends, occasionally glancing at me with a self-satisfied smile, entirely unaware of the shift in energy that had quietly settled over the table. I tried to re-engage, asking questions, nodding along, but my mind was elsewhere, tracking the subtle adjustments the man made, noting the watchfulness in his stance, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes, and the way he projected dominance without aggression. Then the moment crystallized. He leaned slightly forward, placing a chair beside mine, a clear signal to anyone observing that his attention was no longer casual or accidental. A hush seemed to fall over the surrounding tables, Or perhaps it was just in my imagination, but I could feel the weight of his intent, the assertion of power without a single word spoken yet echoing through the space around me. The movement was effortless, elegant, and entirely unnerving. My heart began to race. What was I supposed to do with this sudden intrusion into my evening that had already seemed tedious beyond measure? He had not approached me with introduction or preamble. There was no warning. Yet his presence demanded notice. Every instinct screamed at me to recoil or pretend ignorance, yet I remained frozen, partly because of surprise, partly because of an unspoken fascination that I could not articulate. My hands tightened around the glass of water, and I felt a strange mix of fear and intrigue, an adrenaline rush that was completely unprovoked by anything Ethan had done. Dominic Moretti, though I did not yet know his name, had already shifted the entire energy of the restaurant, turning a mundane, tedious evening into something charged, uncertain, and electric. I wanted to look away, to pretend the movement did not affect me, yet my eyes were drawn back involuntarily, tracing the controlled precision in every small gesture, the quiet authority that radiated from him, and the undeniable message that, in some unspoken way, he had already claimed my attention. Every instinct told me to ignore him. Sensible women did not become fascinated by mysterious strangers who silently took over the atmosphere of an entire restaurant. Sensible women finished their dinner, thanked their date for the evening, and went home. Unfortunately, I had stopped feeling sensible about 10 minutes ago. Ethan was still talking. Something about investment portfolios. Or real estate. Or maybe both. At this point it hardly mattered. Because for the first time all evening, someone else had my complete attention. The stranger finally stood. The movement was simple. Yet somehow half the room noticed. Conversations softened. Waiters adjusted their paths. Even the manager near the entrance straightened slightly. It was subtle, almost invisible, but impossible to miss once you saw it. Power had a language of its own, and this man spoke it fluently. He walked toward our table with calm confidence, neither hurried nor hesitant. My pulse immediately accelerated. Ethan finally noticed. "Do you know that guy?" he asked. "No." The answer came too quickly. The stranger stopped beside us. Up close he looked even more intimidating. Not because he appeared threatening, because he appeared completely in control. Dark hair, sharp features, impeccably tailored suit, green eyes that seemed to notice everything. For a moment nobody spoke. Then he pulled out the empty chair beside me and sat down as though he belonged there. Ethan blinked. "Can I help you?" The stranger's attention never left me. "Possibly." My heart stumbled. The confidence in his voice was not arrogance. It was certainty. There was a difference. "I think you're at the wrong table," Ethan said with a nervous laugh. Finally, the stranger looked at him. The room seemed to become quieter. "No," he replied calmly. "I am exactly where I intended to be." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I should have said something. I should have demanded an explanation. Instead, curiosity glued me to the chair. The stranger turned back toward me. "Sophie Bennett." Hearing my full name from someone I had never met sent a jolt through my chest. "How do you know my name?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Small. Controlled. Dangerous. I know a lot of things." Ethan laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. "Okay. This is getting weird." The stranger finally offered his hand toward me. Vincent Moretti. The name meant nothing to me. Yet the reaction around us suggested it should have. A waiter nearly dropped a tray. Two men near the bar exchanged glances. The manager suddenly became very interested in a nearby table. Vincent noticed none of it. Or perhaps he noticed all of it and simply did not care. "Nice to meet you," I managed. His eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "Likewise." For the first time that evening I felt seen. Not observed. Not evaluated. Seen. Ethan cleared his throat. "So how exactly do you know Sophie?" Vincent leaned back slightly in his chair. Calm. Relaxed. Unbothered. "That," he said, looking directly at me, "is a much more interesting story than the one you've been listening to all night." The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as Vincent Moretti leaned back slightly in his chair, his gaze never leaving mine, And then, with a calm decisiveness that made every patron around us turn their attention for a fraction of a second, he spoke. "Get out," he said, his voice quiet yet absolute, and even Ethan, oblivious to the subtleties of influence and authority, felt the weight behind the words. The man at our table froze, momentarily unsure of how to respond as the ambient noise of cutlery and distant conversations seemed to dim under the force of Vincent's presence. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His claim was undeniable, and every gesture, from the way he adjusted the chair to the way his eyes held mine, radiated protective possession. I blinked, unsure whether to be frightened or amazed, but the truth settled quickly. Vincent had already made a decision for both of us, and the room, for all its size and activity, had become his stage. Ethan cleared his throat, a nervous laugh escaping him, yet he seemed almost incapable of moving, the assertion of authority holding him in place without confrontation. Vincent's expression softened very slightly as he glanced toward me, a subtle acknowledgement that the moment was as much about safety and choice as it was about control. My pulse raced, adrenaline and intrigue mixing with a hesitant curiosity, as I realized that the presence of this man had instantly rewritten the dynamics of the evening. Patrons resumed their activities gradually, conversations resuming as though the tension had been a fleeting ripple, but I could feel the lingering awareness, the unspoken understanding that something extraordinary had just occurred. Vincent remained seated beside me, the slight lean of his body, the positioning of his hands on the polished table, the calm but intense focus in his green eyes, all of it communicated dominance, protection, and the subtle promise of influence over the environment and unexpectedly, over me. I did not speak. I could not. My mind raced faster than my ability to form coherent thoughts, the implications of his appearance and the words he had chosen reverberating through my awareness. This was no ordinary man. This was someone accustomed to shaping reality by mere presence, and now, without any request, without any discussion, he had placed himself in a position of control and guardianship that felt both terrifying and oddly comforting. As I finally exhaled, the first sense of clarity since the beginning of the evening settled over me. Vincent Moretti had arrived, claimed his stake in the room, and left me both stunned and quietly aware that this night, which had begun so mundanely, would be remembered for the sudden, undeniable assertion of authority and the first undeniable flicker of connection between us. The evening had shifted and the restaurant seemed to settle back into its usual rhythm, yet for me, nothing felt ordinary anymore. I was still sitting across from Vincent Moretti, the man who had pulled a chair beside me, altered the dynamics of my evening, and rendered my original date almost irrelevant. Ethan Walker was nowhere near the conversation now, having excused himself awkwardly, and the quiet hum of the restaurant returned like a distant backdrop while my mind replayed the sudden audacity Vincent had displayed. His green eyes scanned the room once more, alert but relaxed, observing without intruding, his posture commanding yet unobtrusive. "You have been very patient," he said softly, the words cutting through the residual tension and making me aware of the rapid heartbeat in my chest. I shifted in my seat, unsure how to respond. "I think patience ran out 10 minutes ago," I admitted, feeling both embarrassed and liberated. He allowed a subtle smirk, a fleeting expression that did not diminish his composed demeanor but instead added a nuance of amusement that I found disarmingly human. "That is precisely why you have my attention now," he replied calmly. The contrast between his composed authority and the quiet intensity in his words created a magnetic tension I could not ignore. As the waiter passed with a dessert tray, Vincent motioned subtly, and the dish was diverted away from our table without disrupting the flow of service, a quiet demonstration of control that went unnoticed by everyone except me. I realized that this was not about intimidation or ego. It was about precision, awareness, and silent guidance. Every action was intentional, every look measured, and in a way that was almost imperceptible, I felt both protected and acknowledged. The soft lighting caught the edges of his tailored suit, highlighting the precision of his movements, the alignment of his presence with the surrounding space. A quiet moment passed between us, long enough to feel like hours, where observation and understanding spoke louder than any conversation could. Finally, Vincent leaned slightly closer, voice dropping to a near whisper. "Do you understand why I intervened?" I nodded, though words failed me. "You make sure I am seen," I said, attempting to articulate the complexity of emotion that surged within me. His eyes softened fractionally, just enough to betray a hint of acknowledgement without losing his composure. Precisely, he replied. The rest of the evening blurred into moments of subtle interaction, shared glances, carefully measured words, the unspoken communication of a man used to commanding spaces yet careful not to overstep boundaries, all while guiding me through an experience I had never anticipated. By the time I left the restaurant, the air outside felt electric, charged with possibilities, and I knew that the evening had shifted irreversibly, leaving me keenly aware that I had just encountered someone who could change everything with a simple presence and a quiet assertion of intent. The city looked different after that night. Maybe because I looked at it differently. Every street seemed brighter. Every reflection in every skyscraper window carried the memory of a man who had walked into my life without permission and somehow made everything more interesting. 3 days passed before I saw Vincent Moretti again. 3 long days of unanswered questions. 3 days of wondering whether the entire evening had been some strange coincidence. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally I would have ignored it. Instead I answered immediately. Hello. Silence greeted me for a moment. Then a familiar voice. Deep. Calm. Dangerous. You sound disappointed. My heart reacted before my brain did. Vincent. A faint amusement colored his tone. Good. I was hoping you remembered me. I stared out the office window overlooking Midtown Manhattan. You tend to leave an impression. That was the intention. Heat crept into my cheeks. The man was impossible. We spoke for less than 5 minutes. Yet when the call ended, I found myself smiling at my computer screen like an idiot. The following evening, another surprise arrived. A small white envelope sat on my apartment doorstep. No return address. No explanation. Inside was a single card. Dinner. 8 o'clock. Riverside Terrace. Beneath it was a handwritten note. This time I promise the conversation will be more interesting. I laughed out loud. Against my better judgment I went. Riverside Terrace overlooked the Hudson River, its outdoor lights glowing softly against the dark water. The evening air carried the scent of rain and autumn leaves. When I arrived, Vincent was already there. Standing near the railing, hands in his pockets, watching the river. He turned the moment I approached. That same steady gaze found mine instantly, as though he had been expecting only me. You came. You seem surprised. I never assume anything. He pulled out a chair for me. Unlike our first meeting, the gesture felt natural now. Comfortable. The conversation that followed was unlike any date I had ever experienced. Vincent asked questions. Real questions. About my family. My dreams. My work. The books I loved. The places I wanted to visit. More importantly, he listened. Every answer seemed to matter. Every word received his full attention. At one point, I caught myself laughing so hard I nearly spilled my drink. Vincent simply watched me with an expression I could not quite identify. What? I asked. He shook his head slightly. Nothing. That was definitely something. For the first time all evening, he hesitated. You laugh less than you should. The sincerity behind the observation stole my reply. A comfortable silence settled between us. The river shimmered beneath the city lights. Boats drifted slowly through the darkness. Then Vincent's phone vibrated. The change in him was immediate. Subtle, but unmistakable. His attention sharpened. His expression cooled. The easy warmth disappeared behind something harder. More controlled. He glanced at the screen and declined the call. Problem? I asked. Vincent looked toward the river. For several seconds he said nothing. Finally he exhaled slowly. Sophie. The way he said my name made me sit straighter. There are people who will not like the fact that we are spending time together. My smile faded. What exactly does that mean? Vincent's eyes met mine across the table. Calm. Serious. Unreadable. It means your life is about to become much more complicated than either of us planned. Suddenly, the lights of Riverside Terrace seemed less romantic and more distant, as if the city itself had stepped back to watch what would happen next. I studied Vincent's face, searching for answers in the calm expression that rarely revealed anything. Complicated how? I asked quietly. The river moved behind him, dark and steady beneath the reflections of Manhattan's skyline. Vincent remained silent for several seconds. He seemed to be choosing every word carefully. Because people pay attention to me, he finally said. And when they notice someone has my attention, they start paying attention to that person too. I leaned back in my chair. You make that sound dangerous. A faint smile appeared. Not amused. More resigned. I make it sound accurate. His phone vibrated again. This time he looked at the screen longer before placing it face down on the table. The gesture told me everything. Whatever waited on the other side of that call mattered. Yet he was choosing to stay here. With me. Who are you really, Vincent? The question slipped out before I could stop it. His eyes met mine immediately. The noise of the restaurant faded into the background. Around us, couples laughed, glasses clinked and conversations flowed. Yet it felt like we were the only two people there. A businessman, he answered. I laughed softly. That is not the whole truth. Another small smile touched his lips. No, it is not. For the first time since meeting him, I saw something unexpected in his expression. Vulnerability. It lasted only a second before disappearing behind the composed mask he wore so effortlessly. There are parts of my life that attract attention, he continued. Most of that attention is harmless. Some of it is not. I prefer keeping people I care about away from it. The words settled heavily between us. People I care about. My heartbeat immediately accelerated. He did not seem to notice. Or perhaps he noticed everything and simply chose not to acknowledge it. And yet you invited me here. Vincent looked out across the river. Because avoiding someone is easy. His voice lowered slightly. Finding someone worth the risk is much harder. My breath caught. The honesty behind the statement felt more powerful than any grand declaration could have been. Before I could respond, movement near the entrance drew Vincent's attention. A man in an expensive suit had entered the terrace. Tall. Confident. Watching us. Vincent's expression changed instantly. Not fear. Not concern. Awareness. The man approached slowly before stopping several feet from our table. Vincent. His tone was polite. Professional. Yet something underneath it felt tense. Vincent stood. The two men exchanged a look that seemed to contain an entire conversation without words. Finally, the newcomer glanced toward me. So this is Sophie Bennett. Every instinct in my body tightened. Vincent stepped slightly closer to my chair. A small movement. Protective. Deliberate. The other man noticed immediately. Then he smiled. Interesting. Vincent's voice became colder than I had ever heard it. You have said enough. The stranger nodded once. Then I will leave you two alone. He turned and disappeared back into the crowd. I looked up at Vincent. Who was that? His jaw tightened. The city lights reflected in his green eyes as he sat back down. Then he gave the answer I had been dreading. Someone who was never supposed to know your name. The ride back into Manhattan was unusually quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows of Vincent's car, turning the city lights into streaks of gold and silver that blurred across the glass. Normally, I would have appreciated the view. Tonight my mind was somewhere else entirely. Someone who was never supposed to know your name. The words replayed endlessly. Vincent sat beside me, his attention divided between the passing streets and whatever calculations were happening behind those unreadable green eyes. Finally, I broke the silence. Tell me the truth. He looked at me immediately. I always do. No. I shook my head. You tell me enough of the truth to keep me calm. For a moment, something almost like admiration crossed his face. That is a very specific accusation. Because it is accurate. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Then the smile disappeared. What do you want to know? The directness caught me off guard. I turned toward him fully. Why does everyone react when they hear your name? Vincent remained silent. The city continued moving around us. Finally, he answered. Because influence attracts attention. That is not an answer. It is the safest answer. There it was again. The careful distance. The invisible wall he always maintained between me and whatever world existed beyond it. Yet tonight felt different. Tonight, I was no longer willing to accept half explanations. Vincent. My voice softened. I am already involved. Something shifted in his expression. Not irritation. Resignation. He looked out the window before speaking again. There are businesses, partnerships, investments, people who depend on me, people who compete with me. Most of it is ordinary. And the rest? His eyes met mine. The rest is why I prefer keeping you away from it. The sincerity behind the statement left no room for doubt. He was not hiding things to manipulate me. He was hiding them to protect me. Somehow that realization made everything more complicated. When the car finally stopped outside my apartment building, neither of us moved. The rain had intensified. Water cascaded down the windshield. The city beyond looked distant and dreamlike. Vincent glanced toward the entrance, then back at me. I need you to promise me something. My heartbeat quickened. What? If anything unusual happens, you call me immediately. Vincent. Immediately. The intensity in his voice stopped me. This was not control. This was concern. Real concern. I nodded slowly. All right. Some of the tension left his shoulders. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me all evening. Why me? Vincent blinked. What? Out of everyone in New York. I searched his face. Why did you choose my table that night? Silence. Long enough to become an answer itself. Then Vincent looked directly into my eyes. Because everyone else in that room was trying to be noticed. His voice was calm, honest, unfiltered. You were the only person trying to disappear. The confession stole my breath. Before I could respond, his phone rang again. This time, his expression changed the moment he saw the screen. Serious, focused, alert. He answered immediately. Listen. Said nothing. Then ended the call. My stomach tightened. What happened? Vincent looked out into the rain-soaked darkness beyond the windshield. When he finally spoke, his voice was colder than I had ever heard it. Someone has been asking questions about you all day. The next morning began with a strange sense of calm, the kind that often arrives just before everything changes. Sunlight spilled across my apartment floor as I stood by the window holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Vincent's warning echoed through my thoughts. Someone had been asking questions about me. Under normal circumstances, the idea would have sounded ridiculous. I was Sophie Bennett. I worked hard, paid my bills, and spent most weekends avoiding crowded social events. There was nothing remarkable about me. Yet somehow, simply knowing Vincent had changed that. My phone vibrated shortly after 9 o'clock. One message. No name attached. Just a single sentence. Are you all right? A smile appeared before I could stop it. I knew exactly who had sent it. 5 minutes later, another message arrived. Breakfast. Rooftop. Noon. I laughed softly. There was something almost impossible about Vincent Moretti. He could command an entire room with a glance, yet somehow checking whether I had eaten breakfast seemed equally important to him. By noon, I found myself standing on a private rooftop overlooking Manhattan. The sky was clear. The city stretched endlessly in every direction. Vincent stood near the railing, hands in his pockets, dark suit moving gently in the wind. When he saw me, something in his expression softened immediately. Not dramatically, just enough. You came, he said. You keep sounding surprised. A faint smile appeared. I am beginning to think you enjoy proving me wrong. We shared lunch overlooking the skyline. For the first time since meeting him, there were no interruptions. No mysterious phone calls. No strangers watching from across the room. Just conversation. Honest conversation. We talked about childhood memories, future plans, favorite books, impossible dreams. The more he spoke, the more I realized something unexpected. Beneath the influence, the power, and the carefully controlled exterior was a man carrying responsibilities few people could understand. Yet despite everything surrounding him, he listened when I spoke. He remembered details. He noticed things nobody else did. Eventually, the conversation faded into a comfortable silence. The city shimmered beneath us. Wind moved gently across the rooftop. Vincent looked toward the skyline before speaking. I owe you something. I raised an eyebrow. That sounds serious. It is. His eyes found mine. Steady. Certain. The night I walked into that restaurant, I had no intention of speaking to anyone. I remained silent. Then I saw you. My heartbeat immediately accelerated. Vincent exhaled slowly. Everyone else in that room wanted attention, status, recognition. A small smile touched his lips. You wanted an exit. I laughed despite myself. That bad? Much worse. The smile remained for a second before fading into something more sincere. You looked like someone waiting for life to become interesting again. The words settled gently between us. Then Vincent did something unexpected. He stepped back. Not closer. Back. Giving me space. Giving me a choice. Whatever happens next, Sophie, is entirely up to you. No demands. No pressure. No claims. Just trust. And somehow that meant more than all the power in the city. I looked out across Manhattan before returning my gaze to his. The man who had interrupted the most boring date of my life was now offering me the one thing nobody else ever had. Freedom to choose. So I smiled. And this time when Vincent smiled back, neither of us looked away.